Hi guys, it's Jane here, and in this, the first of two videos we're going to be asking you to watch this week, we'll be looking at conservation. Specifically, we're looking at why species become endangered and extinct and how they can be conserved in the wild and also in captivity. One reason that species become endangered or extinct is because environmental change occurs too rapidly for natural selection to keep up. Human activities are causing changes to the environment faster than mutations that might help an organism survive in these new conditions are arising. And if you pause this video and take a moment to study the map shown here, you'll notice that regions like South America and Australia, which have the most unique ecosystems, are those that are being most affected. Species also become endangered or extinct because populations become non-contiguous. In other words, populations become fragmented and isolated from each other so they can't interbreed. If there is insufficient genetic diversity in each of these isolated populations, then that population risks disappearing, especially when encountering disease or some kind of environmental stress. And here you can see how this fragmentation of populations has occurred with the tiger in Asia. The map shows how the populations have become increasingly fragmented with time, leading to them disappearing completely in some regions of Asia. Species can also be threatened due to habitat loss. Here you see a wetland, and wetlands are important habitats for many aquatic species and things that eat them. However, these are being increasingly drained so that the lands can be farmed or developed. Forests are also complex ecosystems, and they may be felled, resulting in habitat loss for all the species that depend on them. Hedgerows also play an essential role as habitats for many species. They provide nest sites, food, and varying light levels, allowing a multitude of birds, mammals, reptiles, insects, and plants that live in and around them. Importantly, hedgerows also act as wildlife corridors, allowing animals to move from one region to another by keeping to the hedgerows, and this contributes to biodiversity across relatively large areas. However, modern farming practices have removed much of our native hedgerows, and that allows for arable farming to be conducted on a much larger and much more cost-effective scale, but at the same time that reduces biodiversity. Species can also be threatened as a result of hunting by humans. Elephants are hunted as trophy animals. Other animals like tigers may be hunted because their body parts are prized in traditional medicine in some parts of the world. And animals can also be hunted for food, and this picture shows monkeys which have been killed for bushmeat. Hunting by humans also includes our agricultural exploitation of the sea, where many fish stocks are in decline because of overfishing by humans, and this is something we'll return to in a later video. Species can also become threatened when humans introduce new species into their environment. For example, our native red squirrel population declined rapidly after grey squirrels were introduced from North America. Both species occupy the same environmental niche, but the grey squirrels are bigger and better able to compete for food and nest sites, and they also brought with them a pox virus that killed many of our red squirrels. The dodo of Madagascar was hunted by Europeans in the 17th century, but the rats that also arrived on the same ships as the Europeans also ate the dodo eggs, which meant that there were no new dodos to replace those that were hunted, and consequently the dodo famously became extinct. Species can also become endangered as a result of pollution, and for your specification you're required to know about the effects of pollution by oil and by PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls. These were just once used as industrial coolants, and they've since been banned. They're dangerous to humans and the environment because when they're ingested they can act as neurotoxins, they can cause cancer, and they can interfere with hormone function. They persist in environments for many years, and they accumulate in food chains. Prior to being banned, PCBs were discharged in wastewater where they contaminated aquatic ecosystems. And this diagram illustrates how PCBs are able to accumulate as they're passed up the food chain. You might want to pause the video here to study this diagram in more detail. Oil pollution also damages ecosystems. Accidental discharge of oil into our oceans kills the animals and plants that become covered in it. Creatures are poisoned when they ingest it in attempts to clean themselves. Oil also causes bird feathers to clump so that they are no longer acting as thermal insulation, and birds can die of hypothermia. In addition, when oil covers the surface of water, oxygenation of the water below is prevented, which means aquatic organisms are unable to respire aerobically beneath it. So we've looked at why species might be threatened. We now need to look at how the gene pools of these species can be conserved. But what do we mean by conservation? Well, conservation is an active process that involves protecting, preserving, managing and restoring natural habitats and the communities within them in order to enhance biodiversity, while still allowing for some suitable human activity. Please note that conservation is not about excluding all human activities, but within the habitats that are being conserved, human activity must not be in conflict with the need to enhance or preserve the biodiversity in that region. So this might allow for activities like sympathetic and sustainable methods of agriculture, leisure activities like cycling on the downs, and ecotourism, which contributes to conservation efforts while educating visitors about local environments and cultures. So why is conservation so important? Well, there are ethical arguments for conservation. Each species is genetically unique and so is valuable in its own right, so we have a moral obligation to preserve them. We also need to conserve species to ensure that we can farm animals and grow crops in the future. All of our domesticated animals and crops are derived from wild ancestors. Here are the soy sheep of the Outer Hebrides. These are the ancestors of our domestic sheep. This is a native jungle fowl of India, and from this all our domestic chickens are descended. All of our cultivated brassica vegetables have been bred from a single wild ancestor. We have bred our domestic plants and animals to be genetically similar, and this has resulted in the loss of some rarer alleles that may convey disease resistance or the ability to withstand environmental change. In the future, we may have to breed these alleles back into our domestic species, but this will only be possible if their wild ancestors still exist. Hence, conservation of their habitats is essential. We also need to conserve ecosystems because of their potential future medical benefit. For example, quinine is an anti-malarial drug extracted from the bark of a tree that grows in the rainforest. There may be other plant-based drugs we have yet to discover, but if habitats are destroyed, they will be lost forever. Gene pools are conserved using a variety of strategies. Habitats can be protected, for example, by designating them a national park, a nature reserve, or a SSSI, or site of special scientific interest. Each of these varies in the level of legal protection that they're afforded. International agreements can be drawn up to ban trade in things like ivory, whale meat, and rare plants. Gene banks can be established to try and protect the gene pool of threatened species. This can take various forms. Threatened plants and animals can be reared in zoos and botanic gardens. By using sperm and seed banks, the genes of threatened species can be stored and easily transported around the world if needed, if they are going to be used in breeding programs. If an animal species has died out in a particular area but its former habitat can be restored or protected, then following a captive breeding program, it may be possible to reintroduce that species to the area. And examples of where this has been a success include the reintroduction of the golden lion tamarind in South America, the reintroduction of the Arabian oryx in Jordan, and the reintroduction of the red kite in the Chilterns, where they're now so numerous that it's hard to miss them if you're ever travelling on the M40 south of Oxford. So we've looked at why species might become endangered and what can be done to conserve them, and in the next video we'll look at how agricultural exploitation conflicts with the need to conserve and how we can manage our activities in a more sustainable way. See you there.